There comes a moment in life when financial exhaustion doesn't come from a lack of money, but from too much confusion. You work, you earn something, you try to get organized, but your mind never rests because everything feels overly complicated. Too many rules, too many difficult terms, too many people telling you that you should be doing 1,000 things at the same time, investing, planning, predicting the future, while all you really want is to stop feeling like you're constantly putting out fires. It's as if money is never in the right place, never settled, never quiet, and that constant noise wears you down, drains your energy, and takes up mental space you needed just to live. And that's exactly when a lot of people start to think the problem is a lack of intelligence, discipline, or willpower. They look at themselves and think maybe they're too disorganized, too impulsive, too late in life to be able to deal with money. But the vast majority of the time, that's not the problem. Almost never is. The real problem is trying to live a financial life that's too complex for a routine that's already exhausting by nature. It's trying to apply rules from an ideal world to a life that runs on improvisation, fatigue, rush, and the unexpected. No one wakes up thinking about spreadsheets. No one spends all day working in dreams about organizing a budget. No one gets home exhausted wanting to learn complicated financial terms. What people really want, deep down, is peace. They want to stop feeling like money controls them. They want to understand the basics without feeling stupid, behind, or incompetent. They want to look at their bank account without that knot in their stomach. They want to stop feeling like they're always owing something to the future. And what almost no one talks about is that finances don't need to be complicated to work. Quite the opposite. The more complicated your financial life becomes, the greater the chance you'll give up taking care of it. That's why so many people start out motivated with spreadsheets, apps, and ambitious goals, and within a few months abandon everything. Not because they are responsible, but because that setup doesn't match real life. It doesn't match exhaustion. It doesn't match bad days. It doesn't match the unexpected. And it definitely doesn't match emotion. Because money in real life isn't a math problem. It's a mental problem. It's the constant feeling of owing something to the future. It's guilt for spending. It's fear of running out. It's the insecurity of not knowing whether you're doing things right. It's the quiet shame of not being able to keep anything going for very long. And while that isn't resolved, no advanced tip works. No sophisticated strategy holds up. The most common mistake people make when they want to organize their finances is jumping straight to complexity. They think they need to learn everything, control everything, predict everything. They think that if they don't do it the right way, then it's not even worth starting. But what's almost always missing isn't advanced knowledge, it's the basics done well. The basics that hold things together. The basics that take the weight off your mind. The basics that give control back. When those basics don't exist, any income feels insufficient. Any unexpected expense becomes a crisis. Any decision turns into anxiety. Everything feels heavier than it should. That's exactly why simplifying isn't laziness. Simplifying is strategy. Simplifying is accepting that you don't need to do everything. You need to do what's essential. And you need to do the essential in a way that's so clear you can keep it up even in bad months. Even when you're tired. Even when motivation disappears. Because motivation doesn't sustain a financial life. A simple system does. A doable routine does. A basic structure does. A lot of people are surprised when they realize they don't need 10 new habits, radical changes, or to become a different person to start getting organized. They just need to stop sabotaging themselves with unnecessary complexity. Stop trying to control everything. Stop demanding perfection. And start structuring the minimum. When that minimum exists, the feeling changes. You start sleeping better. You start making decisions with less fear. You start understanding where your money's going. You start feeling progress, even if it's small. And small progress is what keeps the brain going. That's what creates consistency. That's what prevents quitting. That's how real financial organization is born. Not from force, but from clarity. Clarity about what truly matters. Clarity about what can be ignored for now. Clarity about what helps and what only overloads. When you understand this, you start to realize that there are only a few things that are truly decisive in the financial life of an average person. Just a few. Everything else is detailed, distraction, or excess information. These things aren't difficult. They don't require earning more. They don't require luck. They require honesty and consistency. But before talking about what to do, it's necessary to understand why most people can never maintain anything for very long, even knowing what they should do. The answer is simple, though uncomfortable. They try to change behavior without changing the environment. They try to save money while living in chaos. They try to set money aside while living on improvisation. They try to have control while living under constant pressure. And that doesn't work. The human brain wasn't designed to live in a permanent state of financial alert. When everything feels urgent, nothing gets done right. When everything is important, nothing is sustained. While the ground isn't organized, any seed dies quickly. That's why simplifying doesn't start by cutting expenses, investing, or creating ambitious goals. It starts by removing noise, reducing decisions, creating a minimum level of order that works in real daily life, not in the perfect month, not in the ideal week, in the ordinary day. Almost no one teaches this because money has always been taught as theory, not as life, as rules, not emotion, as numbers, not behavior. When the confusion starts to fade, you realize something important. It's not that you didn't know what to do, it's that you were trying to do everything at the same time. And doing everything at once, when money is already a source of anxiety, only makes the feeling of losing control worse. It's like trying to organize the house during a fire. You move around, but nothing really gets better. That's why the first real financial relief doesn't come from earning more or cutting everything. It comes from stopping the mixing accounts with emotion, mixing fixed expenses with impulse, mixing the distant future with the urgency of the current month. When everything is mixed together, the brain goes into defense mode. And in defense mode, no one builds anything. They just react. That's when simplifying starts to make sense. Because simplifying isn't about doing less out of laziness. It's about doing less so you can keep going. Most people break financially not because they do too little, but because they try to do more than they can sustain. And sustain is the key word here. What sustains your financial life isn't the intensity of one good month. It's the calm repetition of simple decisions over time. When you understand this, you begin to see that you need only a few things working. Well, not many things working poorly. You need to know how much comes in. You need to have an idea of how much goes out. And most importantly, you need to stop being surprised by your own money. Because surprise is one of the biggest sources of financial anxiety. When you don't know where your money goes, any expense becomes a threat. Any bill becomes a shock. Any unexpected event becomes an emotional crisis. And it's not because the amount is high. It's because it arrives in disorganized territory. From the moment you start creating a minimum level of predictability, even if imperfect, something changes inside you. Money stops being an invisible enemy and becomes something concrete. Imperfect, but observable. You don't need to control every cent. You just need to stop being caught off guard all the time. This is a quiet turning point because when surprise decreases, fear decreases with it. And when fear decreases, you start making better choices almost without noticing. Another thing that becomes clear at this stage is that there's no point in trying. To save money if your entire life is set up for impulse spending, willpower can't withstand a poorly designed routine. If every decision depends on you resisting, choosing, fighting, exhaustion, at some point you'll give up, not because of weakness, but because of exhaustion. That's why simplified finances don't depend on heroic discipline. They depend on reducing decisions. The fewer times a day you have to decide whether to spend or not, the lighter your relationship with money becomes. And this isn't solved with promises. It's solved with structure. Simple structure. Possible structure. Imperfect structure. But real, little by little, you start to feel like you don't need to think about money all the time anymore. And that's a huge sign of progress. Because when money occupies your mind all day, it controls your life. When it becomes just another element of your routine, you take back control. And this doesn't happen all at once. It happens in layers. First, you stop feeling completely lost. Then, you stop feeling guilty all the time. Then, you start feeling like you can anticipate problems instead of just reacting to them. This process is slow, but it's solid. Unlike quick fixes that promise immediate change and deliver frustration, simplification delivers something far more valuable. Continuity. You can maintain it. You can repeat it. You can keep going even when the month is bad. And keeping going during a bad month is what defines who moves forward financially and who's always starting over from zero. At that point, you realize that organizing money isn't about tightening life. It's about stopping life from being lived at the emotional limit. It's not about saying no to everything. It's about saying yes with awareness. It's not about cutting pleasure. It's about removing the mental weight that turns any pleasure into guilt. When that weight starts to lift, your relationship with money changes tone. It stops being tense and becomes functional. You don't love dealing with money, but you don't hate it anymore either. It becomes part of life, not the center of it. And that opens space for the next level of organization, which is no longer about surviving the month, but about starting to build something, even if it's small. But that construction only happens when the basics are calm. Before that, any attempt to grow just becomes another source of anxiety. That's why simplifying first isn't a delay. It's preparation. It's creating ground firm enough to take the next step without slipping. And as that simple foundation starts to work, you notice a subtle but very powerful change. Money stops being an emotional topic all the time. Before, any conversation about finances came loaded with tension, guilt, and fear of doing everything wrong. Now, the topic is still serious, but it doesn't paralyze. You can look at your reality without looking away, without pretending you didn't see it, without promising you'll deal with it later. And this ability to face your own financial life without despair is, by itself, a huge step forward. This is where many people realize they never needed anything elaborate. They just needed consistency in a few basic things. Because when the basics work, they create a quiet domino effect. You start knowing how much comes in without effort. You start having an idea of how much goes out without suffering. You start noticing spending patterns that used to go unnoticed. Not because someone forced you to track, but because the environment is cleaner now. And when the environment is clean, the brain cooperates. At this point, saving a little stops feeling impossible. It's not that a lot is left over, but something is, and that small leftover starts playing a psychological role far greater than its actual value. It becomes a sign of control, a sign of progress, concrete proof that you're no longer just surviving, and that changes how you see the future. Because the future stops being a constant threat and becomes something you can imagine without that tight feeling in your chest. Another important effect of simplification is that you stop punishing yourself so much. Before, any slip turned into guilt. Any unplanned expense felt like confirmation that you'd never be able to get organized. Now, you understand that mistakes are part of the process, but they don't have to turn into chaos. One expense out of place doesn't destroy everything, because there's enough structure to absorb it. And this tolerance for error is fundamental, because no one builds a stable financial life living in fear of making mistakes. Stability comes when you know that even if you mess up, you won't collapse. From there, you start making decisions with more maturity. You think twice before taking on long-term commitments. Not out of fear, but clarity. You start distrusting quick solutions, not out of cynicism, but because you've felt firsthand the value of sustained simplicity. And most importantly, you start aligning your financial choices with the life you actually live, not the life you think you should live. That alignment brings enormous relief. You stop trying to impress. Stop trying to compensate for frustrations with consumption. Stop using money as emotional anesthesia. It becomes a tool again. Imperfect, limited, but useful. At this stage, it's clear that simplified finances aren't about doing little. They're about doing what works for you. What fits your routine, your energy level, your emotional reality. And that explains why the same tips work for some people and not for others. It's not the tip itself. It's the ability to sustain it. What's sustained becomes a habit. What becomes a habit builds results. And consistent results rarely come from something complicated. They come from calm repetition. That's why, little by little, those core actions start standing out naturally in your daily life. Not as an obligation, but as part of the routine. You check your money without drama. You organize before it runs out. You save before there's extra. You adjust before it blows up. All of this without rigidity, without obsession, without feeling trapped. And the more this repeats, the farther away that old version of you becomes, always tired, always confused, always feeling behind. You didn't become a different person. You didn't become an expert. You didn't start loving talking about money. You just stopped fighting it. And when the fight ends, the relationship improves. This is the point where many people realize that simplified finances aren't the end of the road. They're the beginning. They're the moment when financial life stops being a daily problem and becomes a system that works in the background. Not perfect, but enough. Not impressive, but stable. And stability, for someone who lived a long time under mental pressure, feels almost like an emotional luxury. From Arion, any progress happens with less suffering. Investing stops feeling distant. Planning stops feeling pointless. Dreaming stops feeling irresponsible, because now there is ground. And when there is ground, you can walk without running, without rushing, but without fearing every step. When you look back and compare it to the point where everything felt confusing, heavy, and exhausting, you can see how much this change is more internal than external. You didn't get rich. You didn't fix everything overnight. You didn't eliminate all problems. But something essential changed. You stopped feeling lost. And not feeling lost changes everything. Because when you know where you are even, if you don't completely like the plays, you can decide where to go. Before, it felt like walking in the dark, tripping over bills, surprises, and decisions made out of exhaustion. Now, there's enough light to see the next step, just the next one. And that's enough. That's how financial life really starts to work. Not as a grand project, but as a sequence of simple choices that don't drain you from the inside. You start to understand that those core actions were never about doing more. They were about stopping what was getting in the way of what could already be working. Stop mixing everything. Stop deciding everything at the last minute. Stop living on emotional improvisation. Stop demanding perfection. Stop giving up every time something goes off track. When you remove those weights, money starts flowing better. Not because there's more of it, but because it stopped leaking through the wrong places. And that brings a sense of financial dignity that many people have never experienced. The dignity of knowing that, even with limitations, you're doing what's within your reach. No fantasy, no just possible consistency. This kind of relationship with money is quiet, almost invisible to others, but extremely powerful for the person living it, because it gives back autonomy, gives back calm, gives back the feeling that the future is no longer an unknown monster. When fear decreases, decisions improve. When decisions improve, results appear. Slowly, but they appear. And unlike quick solutions that excite and are abandoned, this stays. You don't need to start over every Monday. You don't need to wait for the month to turn. You don't need to feel behind all the time. You just keep going. Adjust when needed. Breathe when it gets tight. Continue. That's what builds a functional financial life for ordinary people, with exhausting routines, imperfect salaries, hail emotions. It's not glamorous. It's sustainable. And sustainability is what allows you to live better today without destroying tomorrow. If you made it this far, it's because something resonated with you. Maybe the feeling of finally being understood. Maybe the relief of realizing you're not alone. Maybe the clarity of understanding that the problem was never a lack of effort, but too much complexity. If this video helped you in any way, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because that's what shows me that this kind of simple, real content needs to keep going. And comment the word clarity down below so I know you watched until the end and that this video truly spoke to you.